Obsession is horrifying because it turns emotional cowardice into literal tragedy. And honestly, I think that's what makes this movie so horrifying. But the more I sat with this movie, the more I realized it's not about obsession at all. It's about what happens when somebody wants love without honesty. And the reason this movie feels so Shakespearean isn't because it's trying to be clever. It's because the tragedy becomes inevitable the moment Bear refuses to tell the truth. I think that's the most important thing in this movie. Bear doesn't actually love Nikki. He has a crush on her, he fantasizes about her, he wants validation from her. But there's almost no evidence he genuinely understands her as a person. The movie constantly shows Bear avoiding emotional honesty. Waiting all day for a text, getting nervous around her, almost admitting his feelings, and immediately backing away from them. Even when Nikki directly asks if he likes her, he still refuses to tell the truth. And that's the real emotional horror setup. Not the wish, the emotional cowardice. Because the wish doesn't create love, it creates dependency. At first, Nikki seems almost perfect. Sweet, cheerful, totally devoted to Bear. But the movie immediately makes that version of her feel wrong. Like she's emotionally unfinished. Almost like she's experiencing existence for the first time. And what's really interesting is Bear actually responds more to Nikki when she becomes emotionally vulnerable instead. The fake sick dad story works almost immediately. Her sadness works. Her dependency works. Bear doesn't want intimacy. He wants emotional reassurance. He wants someone who needs him. And the movie slowly turns that fantasy into something monstrous. And honestly, the saddest part of the whole movie is that Nikki herself becomes trapped under the obsession. There's a scene where the obsessive version of Nikki is asleep, and the real Nikki briefly comes through. She softly begs Bear to kill her. Not dramatically, not violently, almost peacefully, like mercy. And Bear still leaves to chase validation somewhere else. That scene completely recontextualized the film for me. Because suddenly the movie stops being about this crazy girlfriend horror and about someone who loses himself trying to become someone else's fantasy. And this is the part where the movie starts feeling less like horror and more like tragedy. Every terrible thing that happens grows naturally from Bear's inability to confront reality honestly. He lies constantly, avoids confrontation constantly, manipulates people emotionally, gaslights his friends, keeps trying to preserve the fantasy even when it's obviously destroying everyone around him. There's this horrifying scene where Nikki waits for him all day after he leaves. She literally stops functioning as a person. She just waits, covered in her own filth, and Bear still refuses to stand up for himself or confront the situation honestly. He just keeps appeasing her because it's easier than facing the truth. And I think that's why the violence and obsession works so well. It never feels random. It feels emotionally inevitable. The movie constantly asks, what happens when fantasy replaces honesty in a relationship? What happens when somebody wants affection without vulnerability? What happens when emotional dependency becomes someone's entire identity? The supernatural element almost feels secondary. It just externalizes emotional function that already exists underneath the surface. The horror becomes psychological long before it becomes physical. And then, the ending happens. And honestly, I think it's one of the saddest horror endings I've seen in years. Bear overdoses trying to kill himself. Nikki uses her final wish to make Bear love her the same way she loves him. For a few seconds, they finally emotionally align. They finally understand each other. They finally become honest. And then Bear dies. And the original Nikki comes back surrounded by the aftermath of all his destruction. The emotional truth arrives too late to stop the tragedy. And that's what makes the ending feel so haunting to me. The real Nikki only returns after the fantasy dies. But she's left sitting in the destruction it caused. Bear escapes reality permanently. Nikki has to wake up in it. That's why Obsession stuck with me so much. Underneath all the violence and horror, it's really a story about emotional avoidance, about loneliness, about fantasy replacing intimacy, about people wanting love without honesty. And the movie understands something generally terrifying. Fantasy relationships become emotional prisons. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. Go watch Obsession and see it for yourself.